Good afternoon. I'm here with my two friends and colleagues, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Kelly Ayotte. We have worked on this issue of Benghazi for many months now. And recently, as we all know, there was a hearing on the other side of the Capitol, and many of the liberal media said, well, all the questions have been answered. Well, the fact is that hearing raised more questions than answers. And we have committed to the families of those 4 brave Americans who were killed that we will not stop until this issue is completely well known to the American people. Those responsible for it are held accountable, and those who carried out this heinous attack that killed 4 Americans are brought to justice. None of those things have happened. And what we still don't know about the security at the Benghazi compound, what role the House played in changing the talking points, why our military was not better postured for contingency operations, and why the administration continued for so long to propagate the false narrative that the attack was the result of a hateful video. I'd like to make 2 additional broader points. First, why is it that the perpetrators of the attack that killed the U.S. ambassador and 3 of his American colleagues have never been held accountable to this day? Journalists have interviewed some of these people in Benghazi. Why can't our government do the same? The president said that justice must be done. Where is that justice? Why are the murderers freely going about their lives? Those who are responsible for the Benghazi attack must be held accountable. For more than a year and a half later, that still has not happened. One of the main reasons we will continue to demand answers about the attack in Benghazi is because it is a reflection of a bigger strategic problem, namely the resurgence of al-Qaeda and its affiliates across the Middle East and North Africa on this administration's watch, and their denial of that reality. The administration wants the American people to believe, as the president says often, quote, the tide of war is receding, or as then Ambassador to the UN Susan Rice said days after the attack in Benghazi, Osama bin Laden is dead and al-Qaeda has been decimated. The attack in Benghazi showed how badly this administration is denying reality, and that reality is, as our senior military leaders have all testified to Congress, the threat posed by al-Qaeda and its affiliates is increasing, not decreasing, in the Middle East and North Africa. The growing presence of these terrorists in Libya was clear in the run-up to the attack in Benghazi. There were numerous attacks against U.S. and Western interests in Benghazi during 2012, including an attempted assassination of the British ambassador. On this point, as the recent Senate Intelligence Committee report makes clear, our Intelligence Committee provided ample warning. That may explain why the CIA station chief in Libya, according to published media accounts, reported clearly back to Washington immediately after the attack in Benghazi that it was not the result of a protest that was clearly a terrorist attack, a point that was later echoed by the U.S. personnel who had been evacuated from Benghazi. The day after, the folks who had been evacuated from Benghazi to Germany clearly stated that this was not a, quote, spontaneous demonstration. It's hard to understand why the judgment of the station chief in Libya, the senior intelligence leader on the ground, was overruled in favor of analysts who admittedly did not have all the information hundreds of miles away in Washington. The reality is the United States went to war in Libya for half a year at the cost of more than $1 billion. The administration sought to disengage from the very beginning. They never sufficiently assisted the new Libyan authorities in securing their country, bolstering the rule of law, policing up loose weapons, and checking the rising power of al-Qaeda and affiliated terrorists and militias. Instead, out of an ideological desire to maintain a, quote, light footprint across the Middle East and North Africa, the administration abandoned Libya, and as a result, we won the war but lost the peace. A resurgent al-Qaeda and its allies filled the vacuum in eastern Libya, just as they are doing across the region. So when former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton asked the question, why does this matter? Why are people like us still focused on Benghazi? It is for all the reasons my colleagues have made clear and will make clear. And it's because the administration continues to deny the reality of the growing terrorist threat we face, both in Libya and across the Middle East and North Africa. We will never stop demanding answers and accountability where our national security is at stake, and we owe that to the families of those brave American citizens who were murdered. Senator Graham.
Thank you. 18 months after the attack, not one person's been held accountable that participated in the attack, and we know where they're at. They've been interviewed by major news outlets throughout the world. Not one person in Washington or anywhere else that allowed this debacle to happen has lost their job. But here's why I think it's important for us to continue to get to the bottom of what happened. I'm now of the firm opinion that the information provided by this administration through Susan Rice on 16 September was manipulated for a political purpose, that the talking points were changed to continue the narrative that Al-Qaeda was on the decline, to admit this was a terrorist attack 7 weeks before the election was an unacceptable political outcome, and how the intelligence was manipulated 7 weeks before an election should matter to every American who believes that any administration, Republican and Democrat, should not be allowed to do that. And that's a strong accusation, but I think it is pretty clear that's what happened. This is an important email. The first draft of the talking points got it right. Terrorist attack, Al-Qaeda involvement, no protest, no demonstration. And the objection to the talking points coming out originally that got it right, nailed it, was that incorrectly the CIA had warned about a specific attack on our embassy. So the reason they wanted to change the talking points was to make sure that the CIA was not unfairly accusing the State Department of heeding advance warning. That's what they're saying. But look what the final product was. It had nothing about the CIA's advance warning being taken out of the talking points. It went from a coordinated terrorist attack with Al-Qaeda involvement to a demonstration by extremists. So this whole reasoning given doesn't withstand scrutiny. So it wasn't about changing the talking points so that the CIA would not be unfair to the State Department. It wound up being talking points that changed what happened in a way to benefit the administration politically. I hope that matters. The process in the House has yielded some very good results. The same can be said of the Senate investigation. But I'm here to tell you that the process that the Congress is using will never get to the bottom of what happened in Benghazi. Last week's hearing closed the deal for me. If we continue to do separate committee investigations where they don't talk to each other, they don't do this jointly, then the information we're seeking is going to fall through cracks. In other words, the process can't see the forest from the trees. So I am hoping, begging and pleading with the House leadership to put new eyes on Benghazi before it's too late. Mike Morell's testimony last week, to me, was not remotely credible. And another aspect of his testimony bothers me greatly. We know that Director Clapper in November of 2012 told the House Committee on Intelligence, we do not know who changed the talking points. Mike Morell sat right by his side, never mentioned to the committee that he changed over 50% of the talking points. He said that was a mistake. To my colleagues in Congress, if you accept that, then you've changed oversight forever. I will not accept it's okay for somebody to come here before a committee and withhold information very relevant to oversight and just say, I'm sorry. What does that require of the Congress? We've got to ask the exact question. We'll become prosecutors not a separate branch of government trying to find out what happened with a national security failure. Mike Morrell, I will not accept that he should be forgiven, because that will destroy oversight as we know it today. So 2 weeks after the testimony of the misleading by silence in the committee, Susan Rice wanted to meet with myself, Senator McCain, and Senator Ayotte to explain to us why what she provided on 16 September was the appropriate and best information available. She invited Mike Morrell to speak on her behalf. We didn't invite him. One of the first questions I asked was, do you know who changed the talking points? Because at that time, no one knew. I remember Mr. Morrell talking about the FBI deleted references to Al-Qaeda. And he said in the committee last week that he corrected that when he got back to the CIA headquarters, that he misspoke, that it was the CIA, not the FBI, and that he wanted to set the record straight. Mike Morrell did not set the record straight. What he should have said to the three senators, I changed the talking points. I'm responsible for changing the talking points in this manner. This is who I consulted with, and this is why. Because what he did is he misled us. Clearly, he's saying he doesn't know who deleted references to Al-Qaeda. So he got us talking about Al-Qaeda. Rather than honestly answering a question, who changed the talking points, he took us into an area where he could mislead us. Because he did not change references to Al-Qaeda. It is not acceptable to me for him to have done that. That is not correcting the record. In every sense of the word, Mike Morrell lied to me. He lied to me by not being honest about the role he played when I asked, do you have knowledge if he changed the talking points? I will not let that lie. Now, as to the House process, there have been media reports that the chief investigator for the House Intelligence Committee left the House, has gone into private business, and he's a business partner with Mike Morrell and an individual that's described as the gatekeeper for Hillary Clinton. I believe this conflict of interest justifies a new set of eyes, justifies a select committee. This is what's wrong with Washington. How do I go back to the families of the dead and to South Carolinians who care about Benghazi and tell them this is okay? That the person in charge of investigating the CIA is now in business with the person he was supposed to be investigating. That, to me, has to be corrected. And the only way you can correct this, in my view, is create a select committee that looks at all these groups as a whole. Finally, last week explained to me in great detail why you need a select committee looking at state, DOD, and CIA as one unit. Mr. Morrell testified that the reason he didn't trust the people on the ground and went with his analyst is because the people on the ground were not at the consulate during the attack. If you had had the State Department officials available, they would have told you they were in constant communication with the CIA station chief at the annex, and his testimony would have fallen flat because the CIA station chief had the best information because he was in real-time contact with those who are under attack. So when Mr. Morrell said, I went with the analyst because my people were not there, that is misleading. They were there in every sense of the word. They were on the phone and they got there as quickly as they reasonably could given the circumstances. This is why this email is so important. The station chief on 15 September, the day before Susan Rice misled everybody in the world about Benghazi, felt the need to reinforce the message there was no protest. So to those who are wondering what the people on the ground thought about what people in Washington were up to, this tells you. Take this email where he's emphasizing no protest, and take the testimony of Greg Hicks, who said the following: when I heard Susan Rice on television, my jaw dropped. Why did his jaw drop? He was in Libya. Why is this man begging, don't tell the protest story? Because they knew it was untrue and it would be misleading. Susan Rice needs to be called as a witness. Why did Susan Rice blame the attack on a video when there's no reference in the talking points about a video and the CIA never suggested to her it was the video? How did Susan Rice come to the conclusion that the consulate was strongly, significantly, and substantially secured? Who told her that when there's nothing on the talking points about that, but every American would love to have believed that? Not only did she mislead us, she went way out of her way to reinforce the narrative that this administration wanted us all to believe, that we had it right in Libya. No one has done a better job, in my view, of putting the puzzle together than Senator Ayotte. She is the one that found the contradictions in Susan Rice's testimony about security on the ground. So I want Susan Rice to come before the American people and tell us why you felt you could honestly say that this consulate was significantly, substantially, and strongly secured. Who told you that? And what did they base that upon? Senator Ayotte.
Thank you. I would just say this. The thing that troubles me the most about where we are with regard to the attack on Benghazi that killed 4 brave Americans, which was already mentioned, is why has no one been held accountable? And I would argue that the administration has not done everything that it can do to hold those that they know are responsible for having committed these attacks. In fact, the Senate intelligence report that was issued identifies some of these individuals. In particular, one of them that's directly in the public Senate Intel report said Ahmed Abu Khattala, whom the press reports has been charged by the United States for his lead role in the attack, continues to live freely in Libya. Some of you in this room may have interviewed him because he's been quite free in giving interviews to the press. Yet no one has gone after him. He's still living freely in Libya. And to me, having met some of the family members of those who were killed in Benghazi, we owe it to them to say, when the president said that those who committed these attacks would be held accountable and brought to justice, where has the justice been? And why is the administration not doing everything it can within the authority of the United States of America to hold the individuals who have committed these heinous attacks accountable? And that's, if some of my colleagues have said, or the House committee has said, some of the Democrats have said, why are we still continuing to want to investigate this? Well, you've already heard from Senator Graham and Senator McCain so many of the outstanding issues that have not been answered and the inconsistencies that are apparent. But we have held no one accountable. I would think that there'd be some intellectual curiosity just on that point. Why has no one been brought to justice for these terrorist attacks? To me, that requires the Congress continuing to push. We should have this select committee that the 3 of us have been calling for since right after these attacks. What we have had is a stovepipe review by Congress of this that has created a situation where there are inconsistencies when you put the entire picture together, that Senator Graham identified many of them, and that's why we should have a joint select committee. And finally, when I listened to the former Director Morrell's testimony, I will say one thing that he testified to, which was that he didn't know that Susan Rice, Ambassador Susan Rice, was going to be going on these Sunday shows, and that he did not brief her in preparation for these shows. Who did? Who sent her on the Sunday shows to misrepresent what happened and to talk about security at the consulate that didn't exist in terms of it being significant, strong, and secure? Who sent her on the Sunday shows to say that Al-Qaeda had been decimated even though the reality is that Al-Qaeda references had been removed from the talking points, and who sent her on the Sunday shows to suggest that somehow this was a response to a hateful video. Again, the reference to the video is nowhere in these talking points. It seems to me that the American people deserve to know the answer to that, which has never been answered, and why why has it been so hard? Why are we here 18 months later still trying to pull out this information? When 4 Americans were killed in a terrorist attack, and here we are 18 months later with so many questions that remain, and still some fundamental questions that have not been answered. And that is why we need a select committee. And it seems to me that we owe it to the families of the victims of these terrorist attacks to find the perpetrators and to know why the administration hasn't pursued every avenue available to them to hold people accountable for what happened in Benghazi on September 11th.
We will be putting out today a paper that the list of unanswered questions concerning Benghazi. I'd also like to point out that Mr. Morell's reliance on a, quote, analyst, we don't know who that analyst is. Did that analyst know that there were a number of survivors that were in Germany the next day? Didn't he call them? There's over 2,000 analysts in the CIA. They call them and say, what happened here? Why would an analyst not do that if they are giving information which the director, then acting director of the CIA, would have to rely on? And again, why would the Secretary of State and the Vice President tell the families when the bodies came home, well, we're going to get those people that were responsible for the hateful video, when by then everyone should have known that this was not a hateful video that caused their murders? Questions? Yes.
Mike Morell spoke at length last week about the meeting he had with the 3 of you in November 2012. Was that testimony he gave the House committee accurate or misleading?
Go ahead, Lindsey. It was misleading, as Lindsey said.
I think it was incredibly misleading because he basically bragged about correcting the record. How many people in this town do that? It was an open-ended question about who changed the talking points. He got us to talking about the change in Al-Qaeda, that the FBI took out references to Al-Qaeda because they did not want to compromise an ongoing criminal investigation. That stuck with me as being so unreasonable that I issued a press release. But it wasn't just a narrow question of who took out Al-Qaeda. He took us down that road. And now I know he did not delete the references to Al-Qaeda and the talking points, but he did everything else. A truthful response to the 3 of us would have been, I had a hand in changing the talking points. I gave a heavy-handed edit to the talking points, as we now know in emails that were found out months later. So for the Congress to accept this is a very big mistake for the Congress, because if we're going to let people do this to us, then we better have the best people in the world ask a question. All of us are trying to find out what happened. There's a certain level of trust that comes between us and the number 2 at the CIA. I feel completely misled. Not telling me the complete truth to me is lying. The truth, correcting the record, would have been admitting that he, Mike Morell, changed the talking points with a heavy-handed edit. So I don't accept this at all.
I just want to be clear on that point because he's been accused of misleading a number of committees. You're saying the testimony last week was also misleading.
I think the testimony was misleading in a variety of ways. I think he's trying to make excuses about using the analysts that do not bear fruit. The whole point of changing the talking points was to make sure the CIA is not unfairly accusing the State Department of ignoring warnings. Well, the actual change in the talking points changes the events on the ground. When Susan Rice said, I provided the American people the best evidence available on 16 September, I would allege she provided us the worst evidence available for the truth and the best explanation for the political needs of the White House. So the information that was provided to us by Susan Rice, which came from the talking points, completely misled the American people. It was not the best evidence.
Let me just make one point. Mr. Morell told us that the FBI did the talking points. Then later, quote, in his view, corrected the record. Is that a slip of the tongue? You would tell 3 senators that someone else besides you made up the talking, did the talking points? How do you make a mistake like that, particularly on an issue of this gravity? And then when his people, not him, called and said they wanted to correct the record, he didn't correct the record. Obviously, he didn't correct the record.
Could I just say, I just would like a chance to answer. One thing that troubles me about it is the pattern, because you have the situation where he's testifying in the House committee next to DNI Clapper, and the questions asked that really at that point, he admitted when he testified before the House last week that he should have been forthcoming there when DNI Clapper said he didn't know who changed the talking points, and he's sitting there silent by omission. And then subsequent to that, he meets with us and on the Al-Qaeda reference says it's the FBI. So I guess the question is that this was a pretty hot issue at the time, was it not? For him to sit silent or to tell us not what happened with regard to the reference of Al-Qaeda is really troubling when you think about the pattern that it presents in terms of an issue that was directly very, at the time, I think, a pretty hot issue before this Congress. I want to add one more issue that's very important. When I came out of that meeting, and when the 3 of us came out of the meeting, the thing that really troubled me about it, that is one of the reasons why I would like to see Ambassador Rice, then Ambassador Rice, now in her new role advising the president, come testify about this, is that one of the things when you're in a role like ambassador to the UN, you receive what's called the classified daily intelligence briefing. And those classified daily intelligence briefing leading up to this, they did contain the references to Al-Qaeda. And she said that this was something she was a recipient of. So that's never been answered. In addition to who asked her to come and to do this, and the insufficiencies in the talking points, the problems with it, but also how she went beyond the talking points, I've never gotten an answer as to why, when you were privy in her prior role to some of the classified briefing, why she would also go on television and represent what she did.